welcome back to the Dark Moon podcast. Okay, how about the missing goddess? How removing Sophia from the consciousness created Epstein. Woohoo! Are we going deep? Of course we're going deep. I'm your hostess, Kate Sylvanus, and welcome to the Dark Moon podcast. Okay, we're going like primordial ocean deep before there was even fish. You know, that sort of level, like, Okay, I'm going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein, which is annoying because he's not somebody you really want to sort of talk about much. But, hey, the metaphorical being, right? Not the way you heard, not the island, not the flight logs, not the he didn't kill himself memes, though all valid. But I want to talk about the why Epstein exists. What cultural, spiritual, psychological conditions have to be in place for a man like that and an entire network around him, not only to exist but to thrive for decades, largely unchallenged? I'm going to argue that the answer goes back thousands of years, to a goddess, specifically to the moment we decided to remove her. Okay, stay with me, okay? Right, it's the archetypes problem. Let's start with something that sounds academic but is pretty radical once you sit with it. We don't really have any true feminine archetypes. What we have is archetypes of the feminine as perceived by men. Now, it's not a bad thing, it's not a get-up-men sort of thing, all right? I like men, okay? I don't see myself as a feminist, not as the way the world does anyway. The classical framework most people encounter with the archetypes is the triple goddess, the Maiden, the Mother, the Crone. It sounds ancient. It sounds matriarchal. It shows up in a lot of neo-pagan and spiritual circles. But here's the thing. If you look at it honestly, it's still fundamentally organized around fertility and male utility. All right, it's just the prevailing winds. It's very masculine and patriarchy. Okay, now I happen to be fond of the patriarchy. I believe it was a great thing to happen to the world, and women and children have been very safe, a lot more so, safer than ever before. Okay, those are my personal opinions. So the patriarchy is not something I'm attacking here. But the Maiden, the Mother, and the Crone. The Maiden, sexually available. The Mother, reproductively useful. The Crone, past her reproductive prime, therefore what? Dispensable? Dangerous? Pretty much both. Even the so-called empowering archetypes, the sacred prostitute, the witch, the wild women, you know, they're all pretty much divined in relation to men. A witch is a woman refusing male authority. A sacred whore exists to serve male spiritual assent. The hag is frightening because men can't control her. It all orbits around the male, and as I said, I'm not against this. I'm pointing it out. And here's the kicker, right? We've absorbed these frameworks as if they're ancient wisdom handed down by the feminine herself. But what if they're not? What if even our spiritual templates for womanhood were written by men, about women, for men? That's not wisdom. That's a mirror angled to reflect a particular point of view. Okay, Sophia. Right, why am I getting into Sophia? Let me introduce you or reintroduce you to Sophia. In Greek, the word simply means wisdom, but Sophia as a divine figure is far older and stranger than her appearance in Greek philosophy. She shows up in Gnostic traditions as the cosmic creative force, the feminine face of God, the divine intelligence through which the world is created and known. She's in the Hebrew Bible's book of Proverbs, described as being present at creation, playing before God like a child. Early Christian Gnostics revere her. The Eastern Orthodox Church has a cathedral named for her, the Hagia Sophia. in Istanbul, one of the most magnificent buildings, apparently, ever constructed. And then, systematically, deliberately, over centuries, she was edited out. In mainstream Christianity, her wisdom gets absorbed into the male logos, the Word, Christ, her sexual dimension, and it's all... She had absolutely one of those in the early traditions. It actually gets stripped away entirely. And what's left is either a sanitized wisdom figure with no body or a cautionary tale about the feminine pride gone wrong. In some Gnostic myths, Sophia's mistake, her autonomous creative act, and it's the act that creates the broken material world. She goes from cosmic architect to cosmic scapegoat. In Islam, the divine is rigorously masculine, right? In rabbinic Judaism, the Shekinah, the feminine presence of God, exists, but largely devotional rather than sexually wise. The pattern is consistent. If she's allowed in at all, her sexuality and her wisdom must never be combined. Okay, why? What's so threatening about a goddess who is both sexual and wise? You can see it in a lot of the patterns. Inanna is a famous one, right? Going through all the levels, going down, had to be broken before she could rise again. She was, all of these goddesses. Why? What is so threatening about a goddess who is sexually powerful and very wise in creation? Okay, so I'm going to look at the body that was never described correctly. Okay, so this is where it gets biologically interested. And I promise I'm not going to go off topic here. This comes back to Epstein, I swear. Okay, human females are among the very few mammals to undergo menopause. My hands up. Most female mammals remain fertile until death. We stop. We live, and if we're lucky, roughly a third of our entire lives is spent post-reproductive state. Why would evolution do that? Now, there's a theory that I had to go look up called the grandmother hypothesis, and it was proposed by anthropologist Kirsten Hawkes in the 1990s. The idea is that post-menopausal women increase the survival of their grandchildren by foraging, teaching, and supporting their daughters' reproduction. Longevity beyond fertility served the group. Okay, but what's almost never discussed, right, is what happens inside a woman after menopause. What's going on hormonally, which, it's got standard, and women aren't standard. Neurologically, what's happening in our brains, and most particularly psychologically, okay? Studies suggest postmenopausal women often report an increase in confidence, decreased anxiety via other people's perceptions, and a greater sense of personal authority. The anthropologist Margaret Mead called it menopausal zest, and there's a shift from outward nurturing to something more inward, more sovereign, and a lot more fierce. And yes, we call this the change, and it's spoken like a warning. We have almost no positive cultural framework for what a woman becomes in this phrase. She becomes invisible, or comedic, or just sad. Meanwhile, the clitoris, the only human organ with sole biological function of generating pleasure, went undescribed in medical literature until 1998. I mean, can you believe that? Can you believe that if there was a part of a man's body that hadn't been sort of medically examined until 1998? I mean, it's just unheard of. But, Victorians didn't like talking about this stuff, did they? 1998. Oof. Anyway, when Australian neurologist Helen O'Connell published the first complete anatomical map of the clitoris using MRI imaging. Never been done before. The full internal structure, which extends roughly 9 centimeters internally, with erectile tissue, crora, I don't know how you pronounce that, vestibular bulbs, and was anatomically unknown to mainstream media until the late 1990s. What the expletive? I mean, there's being a prude, and then there's, look, let's not just look at this part of a person's body, because we've been mapping the moon longer than we've been actively mapping the clitoris. It's not an accident, all right? This is an architecture of ignorance, and this is relevant. They don't want to know, or they already know, and they just don't want to talk about it. Psychological prostitution. Right, let's get to the mechanism, because this is where things get generally uncomfortable. You weren't uncomfortable enough? When half of humanity is barred from education, and women were legally excluded from universities across Europe and America well into the 19th and 20th centuries, when their medical knowledge is labelled demonic. What? Females are demons. When female composers and writers have to publish under male names to be taken seriously, what happens? Think about the sheer volume of intelligence that was suppressed. I mean, it just wasn't out there. We know about some of it. We know that Rosalind Franklin's X-ray crystallography work was used without her credit to discover the structure of DNA. We know that Liesl Meitner co-discovered nuclear fusion and watched her male colleague accept the Nobel Prize alone. We know that female computers at NASA, Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, calculated trajectories by hand that sent men to the moon, and for decades were largely unknown. Okay, this isn't knocking men. This is saying, hey, can we just look and see what's been going on? And that's just what we've recovered, right? Imagine what we'll never recover. There's an awful lot of unused, untapped knowledge out there that we would just probably have lost for good. Okay, so beyond the intellectual, consider the psychological effects on women themselves. If the only mirrors available to show you as a maiden, a mother, or crone, if the only stories told about female sexuality are about sin or service, then you have got no map for your own inner terrain. You navigate by someone else's compass. You perform femininity rather than embody it. Okay, psychological prostitution. It isn't an insult, right? It's kind of like a description. I don't want to sort of wind people up just by the labels, but to trade in your authentic inner self for social survival. I watched a movie, right, and it was a young girl on a beach sorting out fishes, and the guys came in, basically used her, abused her, and dumped her off in a brothel. And you're like, it was based in the the early 1900s, and I get that went on a lot, but look at where the psychological anger has built up, right? Where is that anger going? It's going into our children and our children's children. To shape yourself entirely around a gaze of another, not because you choose it, but because the alternative was erasure or violence or both. Okay, that's where I was a little pissed off. Yeah, I was a little bit angry. I don't know how women are going to embody that anger. Have I got it inside me? Has my daughters got it inside me? And it's going to go somewhere, because I am all for what happens when we suppress stuff. Shadow has to be looked at. Okay. Now, what this costs men. You see, I tried to shift it round. I was thinking it's not just women who suffered here. Now, here's the argument that I think is most challenging and the most important. What does it cost men to have removed Sophia? Because here's the thing about initiation. I mean, like real psychological initiation. the kind that ancient cultures actually understood. It's not comfortable, it's transformative. It requires contact with something larger than yourself, something that challenges, disorientates, and ultimately expands you. And in many ancient traditions, it was women, specifically sexually wise, mature women, who held this function. Not as objects, as initiators. The sacred feminine wasn't a prize, she was a threshold. Sumerian goddess Inanna descends into the underworld and returns. She doesn't need a man to do it, she is the journey. Celtic goddess Flaith, which is kind of like the Queen Maeve, she literally grants kingship through sexual union. And you get hints of that through the Arthurian legends. The king's power flows from her. And the king was initiated by the high priestess. It was the only way of crowning him. It's not the other way round. There are hints at it. But, yeah, not much these days. The Gnostic Sophia doesn't possess wisdom, just wisdom. She is the knowing of the conscious cosmos. To know her is to be transformed. Now remove that. Remove the cultural template of a woman who is sexually wise, sovereign, and generally larger than the male consciousness in this domain. Right? Men's domain is the physical world. Okay? They're physically stronger. They can fix stuff. They think in a different way from me. The unconscious realm, however, where the sexually wise, sovereign woman stands. And they stand together. It's just they're not the same. Whoa, into political territory here. What does a man have left to grow towards? He has women as objects these days. Women as props in his own story. Women as things to acquire, dominate, or discard. And here's the terrible logic of it. If there is no transformative sexual wisdom that a mature woman carries, if that concept is literally unthinkable within your cultural framework, then the encounter with female sexuality becomes threatening in direct proportion to her power and her sovereignty. Yeah. If your culture cannot think, cannot even conceive of a sexually wise woman that can initiate you to go further as a people. Yeah, there is like a huge hole in that culture. Massive, huge hole. It will never evolve. It won't grow up. It'll be stuck in childlike mode. The solution unconsciously is to seek out the form of sexuality that cannot challenge you. Here we go. The smallest, the most powerless, the most unformed. Children. And I've got to be I don't excuse this. I'm trying to map it out. Right? I am very angry about what is going on with the Epstein files. But I have to understand it. I have to map it. Because understanding the root of something is a prerequisite for actually changing it, rather than just prosecuting individual men while the cultural conditions that produce them remain intact. Okay, lead and alchemy, the sexual maturation that never happened. Alchemists had a term for the first, base stage of transformation, the nigredo, the black phrase, the lead. Before you can transmute anything into gold, you have to start in the raw, undefined, unrefined, dark matter. What I'm suggesting is that collectively, in the terms of sexual consciousness, a significant portion of male experience has been stuck in the lead phase for a millennium. Not because men are inherently base, but because the alchemic agent has been removed. In alchemy, you need to, excuse my Latin, solve et coagula, probably coagulate. Comes from the word coagulate by the looks of things. The dissolving and recongealing. You need heat. You need the container. In the metaphor of sexual and psychology alchemy, the feminine, the wise, the mature, the sovereign feminine, is both the container and the heat. She holds the volume. She applies the pressure. She is the initiate of the transformation. She's the threshold guardian. Without her, nothing transmute. You just have lead calling itself gold, building islands in the Caribbean. The biology of deep time. She came first. Let me take this way back further, okay? Because there's a biological argument that is both factually accurate and philosophically staggering. Okay. Life on Earth began in water. First cellular life roughly 3.5 to 4 billion years ago. There was a lot of research put into this. Give me a break. And it was asexual. Single-celled organisms reproducing through division. Okay. Parthenogenesis is something like that. It's reproduction without fertilization by a male. It appears throughout the animal kingdom. Komodo dragons can do it, sharks can do it, certain bees, certain reptiles. Sexual reproduction with distinct male and female gametes evolved later as a mechanism to increase genetic diversity and resilience. In terms of evolutionary sequence, the egg came before the sperm. The egg came first. The primordial creative force was feminine. The male contribution, as marvelous as it is, was a later development. Now, I'm not saying this to diminish men, right? As I've said, I like men. It's fun. I'm saying it because the myths we've been telling ourselves are backwards. God made woman from a man's rib. Evolutionary, developmentally, and embryology, the embryo. I couldn't say that word. It's too many. Anyway, no. Women did not come from a man's rib. It was probably the other way around. It's certainly in evolutionary terms, it was the other way around. Embryonic development, all human fetuses begin with a female template. This is common knowledge. X came first and then the XY. The default developmental pathways is female. Testosterone triggers the differentiation into a male body. We know this. The original form was feminine. We've told the story completely backwards. And the backwards story has had, I would argue, civilizational consequences. Very sad, screwed up consequences. The Medusa problem and the jellyfish solution. Let me talk about jellyfish for a second, because I actually like jellyfish. I like jellyfish and I like octopuses. I think both of them are lovely. This is jellyfish. Jellyfish has two body forms. The pulp, which is small and sessile, attached to a surface, and the Medusa, which is free-swimming, mature form. The Medusa is the jellyfish you picture, translucent, pulsing, probably ancient. There's a species called, something beginning with T, and it got a lot of vowels in it. The so-called immortal jellyfish. See, I don't even think I spelt it right from the start, so there's no way I'm going to say that right, but it's Turatopus, yes, whatever. Which, when stressed or aging, can revert its cells back to an earlier stage and restart its life cycle. It is biologically immortal, okay? When I started reading this, I went off on a right tangent. It doesn't die. There is immortal creatures on this planet. It just transforms. There's the mythological layer. The Medusa in Greek myth was originally... I've done a podcast on Medusa. She was originally a beautiful woman, sometimes a priestess of Athena, who was transformed into a monster after being violated by Poseidon. She was killed by Perseus with a mirror shield, but from her head springs Pegasus, the winged horse, the symbol of creative inspiration. Wisdom emerges from the destroyed monster. the feminine consciousness that was the most threatening, so threatening, she literally turned men into stone, was decapitated. And from that death came art, poetry, and transcendence. The Greeks were perhaps accidentally telling a true story about what they did to Sophia. What actually changes things? So where does it leave us? I mean, what practically does any of this have to do with dismantling the conditions that produce the Epstein? I don't think it's primarily about justice, though we need justice. I think we need justice here. But I don't think it's primarily about individual accountability, though that matters too, right? Those that have screwed up and took part or even covered up, they need to pay for it. I think the deepest change, though, is required is cultural, because you look at it and it is systemic. This is just the tip of the iceberg. You look across all the way round and the pattern repeats itself over and over. We need the template of the sexually wise woman to re-enter cultural consciousness. That is the solution. I am a pattern recognizer. I see patterns. Without this archetype in the collective unconscious, this is what we're doomed to redo over and over again. Not a provocation, not as a brand, not as a fetish object, not as a whore that just redeems herself, none of that, right? It's all distortions, but as a genuine psychological and spiritual category. We need women to have access to the full development arc, one that doesn't end at mother and doesn't skip over the post-menopausal authority that Margaret Mead was talking about. We need men to encounter the actual size of feminine consciousness and stay in the room. Not dominate it, not run from it, not fragment it into good woman, bad woman. Stay, grow, transform. And here's what I'll plainly say. Epstein is a symptom. He's what you get at the end of a very long chain of decisions. Theological, political, philosophical, legal, and to make feminine intelligence small. He is lead that was never asked to become gold in a world that has forgotten gold is possible. He's not an excuse, he made his choices. The men in his network made his choices. There were females in his network. It's not a I hate men. It is a cultural imbalance. But choices are made within structures. And the structures, the deep cultural architects of what we believe about women, about sexuality, about wisdom, and about power, is that we have to change. We have to change our cultural architecture, the perception of how we see it. And it could be really easy. It could be done with a meme. It could be done with a movie. It could be just done with a message that's repeated over and over. I don't know. All I can see is what is missing in the pattern. And the work is probably long and, it might be hard. It might be, but it is already underway, right? The goddess of wisdom isn't gone. She's not vanished forever. Archetypes can come back. And I believe that she's been building the whole time. Okay, that's a long one today. I haven't finished this. This is obviously part 1. I've got a lot to say on the matter. But I had to put it out in the form it was in. So if something landed for you or you want to push back, right, I genuinely want to hear it, right? This is the kind of thinking that needs to be in a conversation, not just a podcast. Okay, Love you lots. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye now.